Welcome back to the Logistics Leadership Podcast. I'm Ben Dean, and I'm fortunate today to be joined by Jeff Sexstone of Kearney. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ben. Hey, thanks for having me today.
Of course. So, we're talking about the keys to 3PL relationships. You're talking about that with your clients all day, but also have experience going back to UPS, Home Depot, and every side of the logistics and 3PL relationship world. So, I think we're up for a great conversation today.
Looking forward to it.
I think you're the best person to introduce yourself, and obviously you've got a litany of experience. So, what would you like to highlight about what's kept you interested in supply chain over the last 20 years or so?
Well, good question, Ben. Appreciate it. So I've had the opportunity to work on both sides of the fence. So I spent a few years at Accenture out of undergrad engineering, then worked for DHL for a bit of time, and then went to business school to help kind of round out my expertise in strategy and business acumen. From there, I went to work at AT Kearney at the time. And my plan there was only a couple years. I ended up staying for much longer, enjoyed the stint, enjoyed our interacting with clients in a more structured, strategic manner. Eventually, though, I left when my second child was born and went to work for UPS in corporate strategy. And then another great opportunity at Home Depot, helping drive their omni-channel strategy. A few years ago, I was convinced to come back to Kearney, and I've been back for about 5 years. I'm part of our strategic operations practice. We focus on operations transformation. I particularly focus primarily in logistics space. So we have four main areas: plan, make, source, and deliver. Our logistics, our deliver tower is the area I particularly focus on. And I also based in Atlanta, and I lead up our Atlanta office as well. I primarily focus in the intersection of logistics and shippers. 3PL is one of the kind of the core areas we spend a good bit of time on.
Kearney is very well known, across the industry and especially for operations and supply chain expertise. But maybe broadly, that ties into our episode here. Why are companies going outside and coming to Kearney to answer questions like what makes for a successful 3PL relationship?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons, and I think we'll talk about this more in the future. COVID was a big disruptor in the industry, both in terms of what to expect and expectations for being able to adapt and adopt, and the ongoing trend of e-commerce and omnichannel. So those expectations are putting a lot of pressure on shippers to perform more reliably, more successfully, and some of those shippers don't have the capabilities to do that. At the same time, a lot of the shippers and 3PLs had a bit of a struggle with relationship during COVID because of some of the inflationary effects that were playing out. And those caused some stress in relationships, and partly due to how some of the relationships were structured, and partly due to how some relationships were managed going forward. So we're seeing a lot more of collaboration, kind of working together. Is kind of one of our key things on both sides of the fence.
Great. Sounds like we're starting to uncover a key already there. Going back to the prompt that we're talking about in terms of success for 3PL services, 3PL is a big space, maybe a big word. So when you look at 3PL and are advising your clients in this space, what are we talking about exactly? Let's define the term.
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of our clients are sorting through it, and even a lot of our the 3PLs are trying to figure out what it means to them. So the term has evolved, and we expect that term to continue to evolve going forward. In its most simplistic definition, it's basically a 3PL is a company that provides outsourced supply chain services for businesses. At the core of it tends to be some form of logistics. There's multiple flavors of this. Some focus on warehousing, others focus on transportation, some form of value-add services. A lot of the times it's expanding into other elements, though, including planning, procurement, like manufacturing, and customer experience. It's increasingly important, though, to blend those aspects. We kind of segment into kind of more dimensionality of the physical world, the virtual world, which is like systems and planning, and then the relational world, both with customers and internally with the shipper and the 3PL as well. All those things now need to integrate better to basically provide a more integrated and seamless solution for the end experience for customers. And our discussion today will probably more focus on the core warehousing contract logistics side.
I do want to switch over to the warehousing side of that and the service provider piece. But let's go back to that COVID disruption event and the keys aspect to it. So you've been in the industry long enough to maybe answer this question. Do you think that what's making a company successful today looks a lot different than a decade ago, or the principles stay in place?
There's a couple big trends that are happening. So one is the dynamics due to inflation was disruptive on both sides of the fence, and two is the expectations. So as you know, the Amazon effect has been around a long time. People got a bit of a pass during COVID for disruptions. Now those things are coming more to a head for the expectation that we expect both service, reliability, and now we expect efficiency as well. So those are the things that both shippers and 3PLs that are enabling that need to continue to drive and enable to make this more successful for folks going forward. And we'll talk even further, probably going forward, is a little more about the technology elements that continue to evolve as well.
What are the keys to success just to be a successful 3PL from a business perspective?
As most people know, the entries to being a 3PL are relatively low. Anyone can go out and lease a warehouse, and most people can ship packages out of their garage. That's not the challenge. Be a successful 3PL, we really kind of focus. I mean, the simplest elements is probably two core functions. One is integrating those solutions together. So a lot of these logistics solutions are, it's easy to isolate logistics components and optimize them. What good 3PLs do is they help stitch them together in a seamless manner. Make sure there's the correct flow and efficiencies. Those things have to have the nice tension in blending those elements. Of course, we talked about the physical, virtual, and relational world. The second aspect of it is the relationships and brand. So a lot of shippers, particularly, they very much want a 3PL experience in certain functional areas. So we're recently working on with one of the larger data center operators, and they were looking at basically who do they team up with in the future and how do they do it. And a big criteria with them, given it's so critical to their business, they want someone with an experience. So having that experience, that reputation, is critical to be able to expand in those business segments.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot comes down to just word of mouth, I found in this industry. If it's not shown that you've done it before and done it well, are you going to get the chance to do that for the first time or the second time? Right. And when you talked about, integrating solutions together, maybe it's just my bias towards last mile and the end consumer. Are you talking about omni-channel? Does a 3PL need to be able to, ship freight, ship parcels, pick and pack, do cross dock? Do they need to be able to ship in all modes, pack in all modes, handle everything? Is that what you're talking about having integrated solutions, or is it a different look?
I would split that up. I would say, due to the kind of the Amazon effect, shippers are expecting 3PLs to more have that type of experience. That doesn't necessarily mean they need to be omni-channel. So you don't need to be necessarily, fully omni-channel to be successful 3PL. Things like temperature controlled and medical solutions are core examples and aren't by definition omni-channel, there's a lot of number of successful 3PLs in them. Most 3PLs would say, though, they possess some form of omnichannel services, and that's with varying degrees. And most shippers are expecting kind of those 3PLs to bring more advanced omnichannel like capabilities and experiences to even more non traditional areas, such as even temperature controlled and medical services as well going forward. So it's not critical, but I think that the shippers are going to kind of pull in that direction for the capabilities, not necessarily for, when I say omnichannel, it's mostly like a retail or a CPG directly shipping to a consumer.
Going back to the technology piece, since it seems you were talking more into that space in terms of integrating solutions, what's changed, let's say in the last 10 years in that space about what 3PLs need to be doing to be successful?
Yeah, so technology, my experience and most other folks on both sides would say technology tends to be the long pole in the tent. It tends to be the biggest challenge of doing integration and the time they do it. So that's a key challenge. And most large shippers are having a hard time keeping up with these technology trends, for these Amazon-like experience. And they're turning more and more to 3PLs, expecting to bring those proven kind of solutions that better plug and play at their own core infrastructure. One, to provide the capabilities, and two, to reduce their kind of capital investments and risk. In terms of automation, on the automation side, 3PLs are kind of caught to a varying degree in the automation, dilemma. So they're being asked by all shippers that we want more automation. The challenge is 3PL agreements have traditionally been 3 to 5 years. And depending on the degree of automation, that takes longer times to pay that back, depending on who's paying for that. So what we're seeing is some combination of sharing of that investment more for bigger, longer investments, and also longer term agreements to get so you have a longer term and mutual payout.
I think it's a great advancement that shippers are willing to invest in the automation during the longer time periods to show the 3PL that they're invested in those outcomes as well as the 3PL. I'm also seeing some trends, whether it's RAS or creative solutions on the provider side of the automation side to shorten the ROI. Anything in particular there stand out that's changing the keys to success and when you can employ automation and what the ROI period needs to be?
Yeah, particularly in smaller kind of handling of products, there's kind of two areas. We see a lot more of the robotics, things like locusts, we can basically, that are more plug and play with some configuration that can be swapped out. So less of a physical infrastructure. I can bring in robots and add them and scale them out. We're seeing that pretty common across a lot of the 3PLs, and very in similar systems about it, like Six Rivers and those type of systems as well. Those systems allow scale, flexibility, and dynamics without the initial massive investment because they can be amortized over the agreement. They play to a certain types of characters of shape and form. We're also seeing more things around MHE in terms of forklifts and some automation there. I think that's still being there's some levels of maturity that's still being experimented. And I think the more the cutting edge is we're seeing more things on visuals. In imaging. So those things are easy to kind of plug and play once they're set up. I think that's going to be an area we're going to see more and more maturity going forward. Things that can be plug and play and provide that rapid payback. Right now, it's still kind of at the cutting edge.
And that brings me to a question about education for 3PLs, I guess, and shippers around automation and technology. There's more options. There's more within those options way to procure them and get creative about how to finance it. So, how do you, if you're a successful 3PL or a successful shipper, stay up on what is available and be in the know and on that cutting edge? Is it to talk to Kearney, or do can you do that for yourself? Can you bootstrap it?
I would say it's a combination of things. So there's a lot, hundreds and hundreds of companies that are out there kind of at the cutting edge. We're seeing from the shippers, they're looking more for reliability of services. So it's kind of a tale of two cities here. One is they want to make sure there's reliability and they produce. They want a 90 or 95% solution. They need really a 99, 100% solution that's going to work day in, day out. There's a lot of experimentation. But at the same time, what shippers also want some degree of interesting cutting edge degree as well. So I think what 3PLs need to find is the right balance where they can introduce some things that are reliable, but also kind of interesting and it shows their capabilities while actually kind of continue to deliver day in, day out. So teaming up with select providers in certain segments, we're seeing that kind of work with very select partners to make sure it's proven. And also making sure that it integrates very well with their existing system infrastructure as well.
Would you say from the 3PL and or the shipper perspective, if they're different, that having automation as a core part of your logistics and supply chain solution is a key? Is that a universal statement we can make? How universal can we get about the role of technology and automation in a successful supply chain?
Yeah, I think we've basically heard more and more shippers are saying, "Hey, I want automation." What we caution the shipper side is, listen, you need to look where the payback is. The goal is not automation. The goal is basically better service or lower cost, and that math needs to pencil out. And that's where you got to make sure you're kind of playing, and you can do some experimentation in limited pilots, and a lot of these providers are looking to kind of do that. Other ones are kind of more proven. So there's ASRS type systems out there that are very well proven and very mature in areas, and they can basically demonstrate that success pretty well. In plugging those systems in where it meets the right criteria, and that's the other key about it. You need to have the right kind of automation for your solution. Some people say, "Hey, I found this out." The reality is, it's a mix of variability, volatility, and throughput. So how much of volume I'm doing at any given time, how variable and volatile, because you want to basically be able to sweat those assets that are more consistent. If you believe your business is going to be very dynamic and changing rapidly, it's a harder case to make that investment because it may not work in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point in that this is a tool, and there are many tools within that tool set of automation and technology, but it's not necessarily a key to supply chain success unless it unlocks a particular need in terms of service costs, etc. And so you started out talking about relationships, and I think that's key here. We got into the technical stuff, so let's specifically talk from the shipper perspective and looking at what you've told your clients and all of that. What do you see in those big K keys for shippers to do to create successful 3PL relationships?
Yeah, this is a key topic that continues to come up. And I generally separate shippers in two main categories. One, if you're a stable kind of shipping shipper that knows your volumes, knows your type of product, is not going through a lot of dynamic and massive growth and changing form factors and locations and services, things like that, the agreement can be more structured. You rely on what you're doing today, put that out to market, work with your 3PLs to say, listen, this is what I expect. You begin much more of a kind of a closed book fixed variable agreement and saying, listen, this is what you do well. This is what 3PL does well. We understand our business. That's one kind of play. And then you have to kind of go down that path and having the agreement set up right, having the right governance for those, and not taking off, not basically walking away and having the 3PL manage it. You still got to stay close. That's one part of the for key. The other part is the shippers that are more dynamic. They're much more growing. They don't know what the future foretells for them. The size, shape of their demand might be different. The dynamics may be very different. In those relationships, they need more of a partner that can help grow and evolve with them and can coach them along the way. And these tend to be agreements where cost plus arrangements tend to work better because you don't have this certainty in the balance and allows the 3PL and you have to put certain terms and conditions there where there's mutual value on both sides and there's mutual productivity gains. And that relationship has to be, that governance of that has to continue to work out. Where both the shippers and with both the 3PLs improving operations, at the same time, the shipper themselves need to continue to mature some of their operations as well. So it provides mutual benefit.
I love this dichotomy here because it's very different approaches, but very, very different. Again, you have to know as a shipper variability what your future holds. So I'm curious, do when you talk to shippers, not naming any names, do most of them know which they are? Are they fully into one camp or another? Or is it kind of a mixed bag?
Yeah, most of the biggest 3PLs are doing a bit of both, and it depends. They have that kind of that role, and they're trying to shape it in different directions for both business purposes and relationship purposes. Um, and I would say we expect both to continue. I think COVID, there was probably more pre-COVID, more fixed variable, but because of the inflation, some of the pressures on that, there's basically a little less a propensity for risk on the 3PL side. So we're seeing a little more, push for the cost plus. But at the same time, when you go down that path, you got to make sure you have the right balance to make sure those costs can stay in check as well.
What you're saying, especially as it comes to, the investment that needs to be put into the initial agreement, do you see that most companies aren't doing that? That there needs to be, and where's the focus area? How do I become an expert at making the right agreements?
Procurement groups are exceptional, but 3PL arrangements are special arrangements that require more expertise than your typical. It's not a transactional relationship. It requires a little more depth of thinking through, putting the right process in place, and putting the right governance in place, and having a real good, honest, across functional alignment with stakeholders to make sure, hey, listen, if we're putting this out, this is really how we're going to perform, or if we don't know how we're going to perform, this is some more flexibility we need to have. In baking as much into the agreement as possible with a key focus on kind of that relationship, transparency, and basically what the roles individually are. So again, the benefit of a best 3PL relationship is both parties are continuously benefiting from that. If one side or the other it gets a little lopsided, you start getting more friction and stress in there, and that's where some of these relationships go a bit sideways.
Usually, those terms and governance are established, kind of the rules of the road by the shipper. That's at least my experience. Do you think 3PLs can play a bigger role there in showing shippers what will make them successful in a more transparent type agreement?
Yeah, well, one again, we try and continue to coach our shippers to be more open about it, less completely transactional. But at the same time, the 3PLs need to coach the other way as well. They need to kind of build and show some flexibility too. So I think that's what we're seeing. Depending upon, there's lots of degrees of the 3PLs and their rigidity and flexibility that plays well to their business models. Um, but they need to coach, particularly on the governance model, in helping set up a governance model where there's mutual sharing of ideas. There's mutual sharing of operation improvements as well. So both sides kind of come to the table together. So the shipper doesn't back away and just hand it off to 3PL. And then when a bump comes down the road, you're dealing with less experienced people that don't know the operation as well. And that's where things tend to be some challenges. And working together tends to be much larger opportunities for both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm personally really interested in the governance side of that. In that you've spent all this work to go through detailed RFP, maybe hired Kearney to do so, found a great operator, invested into the agreement, and now things are operating. But like we all know, forecasts are wrong. Things are going differently than planned on the floor. What what are best practices you employ in terms of governance to make sure that thing doesn't start to slip off the tracks?
Yeah, and again, it plays a little bit to that degree of how stable and how random we are. But in general, you should be having, there should be clearly kind of some relationship. The debate is, do you have some shippers represented in the building or not? That's a big thing. If you have a more dynamic operation, you definitely should. Even then, if it's more stable, you should still have at least weekly check-ins with them. Make sure you have transparent reporting, and your monthly business review should be both sides coming to the table with what the forecast is, how reliable it was, what's going to happen in the future, so the 3PL can better prepare for that. And the 3PL should be saying, being honest and transparent on, hey, listen, these are the things we did well, these are the things we not did well, and building trust in those metrics, having the key metrics, and then also saying, hey, these are some headwinds that we wish we can kind of work through mutually that will basically benefit both sides. I think those are the kind of key things that work best when it's a joint collaboration in those discussions during those monthly and even bigger quarterly reviews, which tend to be more top to top.
That all sounds like a lot of work, to be frank. So here's an interesting question from that. Why aren't more shippers just doing this for themselves? What's the inherent value in the 3PL? And is that going up or down? Do we expect that shippers see more outsourced logistics in the future or less?
Yeah, we generally expect to see more and more 3PL outsourced in the future, and there's three main reasons for that. One is the capabilities. Shipper, customers are expecting better services. It's very hard for any individual shipper to be a logistics expert at different areas and have the investments to support that. That is the purpose of a third party logistics provider that can spread those investments out across shippers. Two is there's a lot of geopolitical disruption in this space. Again, another hard thing for how do basically shippers keep on top of. They keep on top of their own areas, but they may not be able to keep on top of the global supply chain and how to basically adapt and react to that. And third is that technology element. Again, where to invest, how to basically interplay. That's a kind of another key area we see that shippers are going to be. Hey, it's a good challenge too. We see a lot of the biggest shippers. Yes, there's investments for the biggest retailers in this space. We see beyond that, a lot of folks are going to their 3PL partner and saying, hey, listen, how can we better team together, either on certain new startup businesses or core business as well? And we continue to see more of 3PL usage throughout across industries as well.
Yeah, so that trend should continue despite the challenges. And I really resonate with the piece about specialization and knowledge. You as a shipper have your area where you're focused on, which is selling your goods for the most part if you have a supply chain. And allowing third parties to focus on what they do well is obviously just intuitive. But one of the trends that I've seen as it comes to 3PL service companies is as many seem to be taking non-integrated approaches and splitting off divisions. Think of XPO, GXO, RXO. I think there's a QXO now, and trying to be really specialized into areas while shippers are asking for integrated solutions. Do you see those two things at odds, or are they different sides of the same coin?
Yeah, on the in the logistics industry, this has been the end all debate. Can we basically provide a seamless experience across molds, models, and services, and for certain shippers that appeals to them? The challenge is most shippers, they like that experience element, but they really like to put all their eggs in one basket. That's probably their biggest concern. Where so in the end, warehousing and transportation providers still tend to be segmented unless there's like a dedicated like routing and or routes and things like that where it tends to be integrated. It's really 3PLs need to basically anticipate not just the bundled services, but really how to create more meaningful long-term value for shippers. So having it all is great, but how does that create more value? And that's been where basically it's been a bit more of a challenge, other than saying, "Hey, listen, you don't have to worry about it." Okay, well, how do you sell that? What's the truly the? Is it a better service? Is it better cost? So I think those are things that a 3PL needs to continue to challenge themselves on, and what does that bring? And then how does that play out for the long term as well, which where most shippers get concerned about.
I'm wondering if there's a recent or shining example you've had of somebody who's taking their partnerships from being transactional and, you know, at odds with one another. And here's an example of how we were to get in that direction, something a little more concrete.
Yeah, I'm not going to share any specific client names, but again, this is kind of we're seeing this more and more, and we're seeing the things that we've been involved in. We're seeing that kind of more and more work out. It starts with the agreement. So agreements are key to kind of make sure that mutually there's alignment to what's happening. and what's going to happen in the future. And both sides need to be honest around that. And like I said, on the governance side, it is key as well. Um, Again, what the biggest thing though is the relationship. And when I say the relationship, it's not just on paper, it's not just in governance, it's between both providers saying, hey, listen, this is really what's honestly going to happen. And that relationship, that mutual relationship and trust is fundamental to all these type of agreements where you can pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, we have a challenge here and work it out until versus something becomes it starts to fester and becomes a challenge. And that's where things are a bigger issue. What we've said is, listen, you have to put all those things in the right place, things in place, the right agreement, right governance, but you got to continue to kind of nurture that relationship as well. That'd be the third element to kind of keep successful. And we're seeing more and more of our shippers into that in that realm. But again, there's still a lot of things that, hey, can I get through this process fast and and do it rapidly? And that's where challenges tend to rise.
You talked at the start about the impact of COVID on what we're seeing in the industry. What to you are the biggest forever changes to how we interact with our 3PLs and 3PLs interact with shippers as a result of the learnings during that era?
Tactically, I think there's a big because of the inflationary elements, both finding labor and basically hiring and being disruptive. Um, I think there's more indexing on types of services. So make sure there's kind of mutual. A lot of time 3PLs get upside down for some of these agreements, so they were fixed variable or closed book agreements. So I think we're seeing much more of that's going to be structured to cover themselves. I think the outlook on inflation is still, there's still some people want to make sure they're covered in that. I think that's critical. The other element is more the strategic element. So shippers know they need to be resilient. With this new administration coming in, there's lots of discussions on, hey, listen, what are the geopolitical risks? How are things going to react? How do we adapt? So that strategic partner that you can help ideate and think through, then help it come to you with proactively is also going to be kind of critical. And I think more shippers are expecting, again, if you're using a 3PL, the expectation is that shipper is not going to be an expert at 3PL services or logistics services. They're going to need their 3PL to be more strategic minded, to be more a step ahead of the curve, because that's where what the future is. We expect more disruptions going forward that are going to be concerning, and the 3PLs need to come to the table to help coach and advise their shippers in a balanced manner.
Yeah, I would include that as a key is to bring that value to the equation is telling your shippers things they don't know. And whether that be in the world of trade, which I do want to actually highlight right now. So I don't think there's any question. We don't need to get into politics that protectionism, tariffs are on the table, both in the U.S. and potentially in other countries leaving the U.S. So what do you see specific to the 3PL industry if that proves to be one? How can you prepare for it? And two, what do we need to do when we're in a protectionist environment to be successful in the 3PL space?
Yeah, and it's not just tariffs people need to think about. There's also likely going to be further elements what we call, the industry is calling contested logistics areas. So geographically areas that are some degree of strife that are disrupting the flow of goods, whether it's inside countries, across borders, or across regions. We expect, and the expectation is that will likely increase over the next decade. So what shippers need to do is they need to spend time thinking through that. And biggest thing is they need to kind of we call it scenario planning, and that's basically planning for what if type scenarios, not extremes, but like listen, like how would these things literally play out if certain disruptive events happened, and how would our supply chain adapt? And that's something we have to account for in now, or is that something we'd adapt for in the future when those events do arise? So we have a plan. So there's certain things you can put certain capabilities in place that allow some dynamicism, but to a certain degree there's cost of doing that. Or how do I pivot? And a lot of this is obviously, there's China and how much product comes in there and what the disruptions are going to be in there and where it moves to, and helping build up those supply chains. Those take a lot of time and continue to take time, and then how those products can flow around different markets.
You said contested logistics areas. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that would both encapsulate like a Houthi Red Sea situation as well as another ILA strike. Both those things could potentially be.
I would say contested logistics are probably more due by geopolitical strife versus. You're right. Obviously, there's obviously labor disruptions as well. That's kind of a key element that continues to play out in different ports. I think folks have gotten somewhat experience in that, but I think, and we've gotten at least a few years more, at least in North America. But I think those things will continue to basically will drive some thinking as well.
And, on a personal basis, I thought one of the biggest takeaways from the COVID era was that companies did need to have better supply chain resilience, multiple sources, multiple points of entry, etc. And one of the shocking things to me has been that you talk about these scenario plannings and things you do now or things you do if when, right? So it do you see the same thing in that companies, though they saw what happened during COVID, are still somewhat brittle and single sourced, but maybe are planning in case? Like, is there action being taken to develop multiple levels of defense and depth, or are companies, ready for that, but not necessarily spending an extra dollar until they have to?
Yeah, again, two points I make around it. One, companies generally play to what they know or what happened. So they don't necessarily play to what could happen. And that's where basically these things are disruptive. So you need to play out some multiple of those dimensions. So what happened in the past likely will not play out the same way as the things in the future. So that's one area. So making sure you're adapted to it. And the other side of that is how do shippers kind of basically develop their resiliency? Resiliency is expensive, so you have to figure out ways that are important to kind of invest in. We had a lot of investment in inventory, and that caused further disruptions in inventory write downs and inventory adjustments that were even more significant as well. So finding that balance of, hey, listen, how dynamic does my supply chain need to be? When and where do I lean into inventory, and in what locations? And then where is it critical? People tend to treat all categories the same ways. They need to basically be more segmented about certain categories and what the implications of those are as well. Particularly things like even further down the supply chain, they go, well, listen, I have an issue here in this market or this category. For example, like finished electronics goods. The reality is, it wasn't as finished electronic goods. It tends to be things like chips. So the components that go into there. So you need to spend more time understanding how they all play out together.
Yeah, those multi-tier supply chains. I think that exposed a lot with the chip issue for sure. Something's going to be different 3 years from now. It was definitely different 3 years ago in our space and supply chain logistics. What do you see as the biggest differences in 2028, start of the year to 2025?
Yeah, great question. So let me go through three elements. So one, capabilities. So we've gotten past a lot of disruption, and now there's an expectation for performance. So we expect to see more balance of time focused on cost to serve analytics and driving smarter, more integrated and cross-functional business decisions, which kind of play those out. So we can get better service to customers at a lower cost point. But that requires understanding individual orders and what the cost to serve to those are at a specific location. Two is geopolitical. We do anticipate more disruptions will likely increase for that period of time. There's going to be a lot of whipsaws as part of that, both into high inventory, low inventory periods. That's going to result, and this how those products flow. So supply chains of the future, you're going to be somewhat prepared for that, highly prepared for that, or not prepared at all. And this is going to have an implication on some of the winners and losers in the industry, both on the 3PL side and on the shipper side. And the last part is not necessarily being the best at individual technologies. It's the best at making the technology seamless across both the services you're providing and the 3PL, the shipper, and your integrated providers in your ecosystem as well, carriers, visibility providers. That's where we're seeing more focus on the interplay, less on potentially, massively cutting edge. You'll see more of that, but more time in making sure those places play well together and provide, the meaningful value that's going to be key. So those are the three things that um, I would expect to see more in the next 3 years.
Great. Three things for 3 years. And the technology one, I hear so much on in terms of the needs for orchestration layers and communication layers that would create the connectivity between these disparate systems. And this may or may not bleed into what I'm going to ask next, but AI has been the hottest thing on the technology side, whether you're supply chain or not. So, short term and long term, what do you see AI impacting supply chain this year in the most ways? And then, just call it 3 years, 5 years again, where do you see AI impacting the most at that horizon?
Yeah, I think AI has been the term at all conferences, supply chain conferences in 2024, and likely be to a certain degree, but somewhat probably less in 25. I think the push has been more around value. I think that's what you're going to continue to see in the near term. Folks are seeing, okay, great, we've had the excitement, the hype, where we're at the hype curve has come down a bit. Logistics is kind of a little bit different than other areas. Logistics companies are still struggling with core WMS, TMS, and OMS integrations, data flows. Where AI plays in, transformation value is things around language. And there are places where that will continue to play out. But again, the core is making sure those other pieces kind of seamlessly fit together. But some of the areas we're seeing more opportunities around are things like we expect to see more opportunities around AI, around imaging. That's going to be one of the key areas. We're seeing that kind of play out, both saving based resourcing and labor. Customer experience, again, getting that feedback back, internalizing it, and summarizing it. Again, things that are going to basically better experience, quicker response time, more real time planning as well, being able to adopt. Um, Fines diagnostics, understanding where fines are coming from and help understanding, getting the wording correct, you can leave it in there. And then just importantly, the training and onboarding of team resources as well. Those things we see kind of being really good fits for a lot of the AI space that have, when we say AI, we're looking for things that basically either improve, again, service experience for the customer, reliability, or cost. And that's where we recommend making sure people's kind of focus on eyes wide open. What are those things you're going to be impacting and how?
Yeah, and those are the keys again. Those parameters, AI just being a tool around them. So notice this was the one you didn't prep your answer on, which is good. I want this off the cuff. So where you been? You're in on site at UPS plenty. What's the craziest story that's fit for podcasting that you've had in your logistics experience?
Great question. I'm going to actually give more of it's a holiday period of time. I had the opportunity when I was at Home Depot to spend some time in the operation, actually helping fulfill packages. I think for any logistics executive, I think it's important to spend time out in the field and kind of understanding every element of that, especially around the holiday times where we have the busiest period of time and busy experiences as well. So for me, it's that experience. I'm not sure it's the most crazy. I would say the most interesting part is, hey, you're on your feet all day long. You're handling all kinds of volume. You're being measured against other one. Kind of putting yourself in that what that associate is experiencing and how they feel. And then also coming back as a team and how that integrates. And we had Home Depot does a great job where they give out, we have Thanksgiving celebrations as part of that. I think it's a great reward for as well. And it really keeps up morale. So I think that's something that we can't kind of step away from when we think of all these analytics technologies as well, is the people part of this. A lot of, again, logistics is always going to have a people element to this. It's always going to be critical to provide motivation, provide excitement, and really give a long-term kind of home for folks. I think that's probably one of the more rewarding things I enjoy about logistics. And it's part of the family experience. I think that's going to be so critical for both 3PLs and shippers in the future as well.
And nothing like throwing boxes into trucks over the holidays to bring a family together.
Always a lot of fun as well.
Oh gosh, great way to end it there, Jeff. Thank you for your time and the thoughtful responses.
Been a pleasure.